Welcome to TYP Live Chat. Today I'm very glad to present you my guest, Adam Blando, who joins us from UK. So Adam, would you like to introduce yourself and say hello to our audience?
Good evening. My name's Adam Bland. I am a contemporary Netsuke artist, an antiques restorer as well. And I'm here this evening to chat a little bit about that and what Netsuke mean to me and how I fell into this area of art.
Okay, great. Yeah, so actually Adam is one of the oldest friends of my of TYP Art Cruise, and it was back in 2019 because I discovered Netsuke from this famous book, so The Hair with Amber Eyes, and then I was interested in the Japanese Netsuke, so I wrote a week about it. So my selection was the Japanese traditional Netsukes from the 18th and 19th century. And Adam, I was very glad to have you as a collaboration because you're a contemporary artist, an English artist who carved Japanese Netsuke. And you give us, at the time, you gave me actually your point of view from an artist perspective, how you create them, the selection of material, while my focus more on culture and the story side. So for those who don't know, Netsuke are tiny objects, carved objects, like maybe you can see on the book, like this little rabbit or hare, and they were used actually as a belt for the kimono. But I think Adam can explain more and maybe tell us, how did you discover Netsuke and why do you decide to be a Netsuke artist?
Well, I'll go back to kind of my background first of all. I originally studied fine art and design at college and university. This is kind of back at the start of the millennium, the noughties. Then after that found a job in model making, so making planning models for architect firms. Okay. And then at the start of the 2008 recession, that kind of, I lost my job and art fell by the wayside, and I got an office job just doing normal everyday stuff just to pay the bills, and art kind of fell away. And it wasn't until I returned to university to retrain in healthcare back in 2011 that I started picking up art again. And it was during that time that I accidentally purchased what I found out to be a Netsuke later off eBay. So I purchased just something called a manju, which is like a round plain object, sometimes carved with patterns, but this was just a plain, almost like an ivory donut. And that led me to different avenues on the internet finding out about Netsuke. And at that time, when I had more spare time as a student, I started carving when I was supposed to be writing assignments, basically. I'm terrible at procrastinating, so basically I'll do anything to avoid work, especially written work. And so I carved a few of these things because I realised there was more to them. They were much more elaborate. They had stories behind them. They were really interesting objects, but the likelihood is the really fancy ones I wouldn't be able to afford or own, but I might be able to make my own take on those. So I started doing that and shared some of the results online. I was encouraged by some other carvers who thought I had some potential, and they give us some pointers and tips. And then gradually over time, I just started working on it more and more, just as a hobby in my spare time, just as a general interest, and joined a few groups and went to see antique Netsuke in museums and stuff. And it wasn't until I started doing that, I made friends through that. And some of those friends were antique dealers. And one in particular, a gentleman called Robert Wilford, he thought I had the potential he might be able to represent me and sell some of my carvings, which I'd never considered before. And he really encouraged us to start developing my style and technique, and he acted almost as an agent for us, which encouraged us further. So it became a bit more than just a hobby. Before that, it was just a way of enjoying spare time and doing something that helps me to tune out and And then it became almost like my second job now, where I spend a lot of my time thinking about Netsuke, looking at Netsuke, carving my own Netsuke, restoring antique Netsuke. So it's really developed into something much more than I ever thought it would be when I first started avoiding essays. So.
Wow. So it all started randomly, but of course you were interested in carving. But
Yeah.
I mean, what's particular about Netsuke that talks to you? Because it is so small. I mean, you like carving. Usually, you know, we think about sculptures or the objects that we have in the Western world, that they are relatively, like, say, a larger size. And Netsuke is such a personal object because usually people carry that, you know, in Japan in the old times on their belt every day. It's not just for decorative purpose. It's just fascinating for me that you in England, I don't know if you ever wear a kimono and hang your Netsuke on that. You started to do that, and where did you get your inspiration?
I've always been interested in Japanese culture, though I hadn't really heard of Netsuke before I accidentally purchased that one on eBay. I think I often think why Netsuke and why am I doing this? It is a Japanese art form. I think as a model maker, the idea of working on a small scale appeals to us. Making large sculptures I wouldn't say it takes more time, but it takes more space, it takes more materials and tools. Netsuke is something you can do in the corner of your bedroom if you need to. You can sit and do it in front of the television. So it's much more of a relaxed pastime. And the other side of it is, I think, because I come from an art and design background, not just an art as an art form, it's they were never supposed to be an art form in themselves. They were a practical, everyday item that most Japanese people used prior to the introduction of Western clothing. So everyone almost would have had some form of Netsuke, whether that was just a piece of wood that was undecorated. And it's almost like, if you think about it, having a fancy phone case. Everyone has a phone and probably a phone case, and some people have very practical, everyday ones which aren't fancy. They don't look particularly nice. Other people go to far extremes and get diamond encrusted ones or gold plated ones. And I suppose that's a really neat modern analogy for what they are to people. They were essential everyday objects, and it became a way of showing off. And because it combines design principles with the art principles, you've got quite it's almost like a bit of problem solving. You've got quite a specific set of criteria you have to fulfill for that to be a successful Netsuke. Not that they particularly get used or worn now, but I always work to the idea that if they were worn, they would work as a Netsuke. They wouldn't break, they wouldn't be too heavy, they wouldn't sit wrong on a belt. So, and I have worn one or two before. I've when been to conferences or antiques fairs and stuff like that. Sometimes I put them on, and when I visited Japan, you still see people wearing them as well. Not many, but you do see some people with the keys attached or the tobacco or whatever it might be. You still see people who use them on a daily basis.
So it's still a living object. Actually, it's interesting. You compare it with the phone case, and I'm thinking of, those decoration things that we put on the key rings, or even before on the mobile phone. I think like 15 or 20 years ago, especially for girls, we put a lot of things on it, and actually it remind me a bit, all those decorations.
In Japan now, they call those Netsuke. And if you go to the Netsuke Museum in Kyoto, there's a contemporary Netsuke Museum in Kyoto. They actually sell ones in the shop there, which have been made by Netsuke artists. Because I think a lot of Japanese phones still have, or certainly the cases still have that little bit on the corner, which now in the West have disappeared from our phones. We don't have them anymore, but they still use them out there. So
Ah, that's interesting. And I saw on your the photos that you share on your account, there is one little dog, actually really cute, and holds a bone actually in the mouth. And it looks
mhm.
like your dog that you share a photo. So I wonder, is that really your dog? And where you get this, what the story behind this one, where it comes from? Maybe you get an
Um,
idea when you're watching TV, playing with your dog.
it's well, no, the Netsuke happened long before I had the dog. And
So
our
because
dog
of
now is
that,
very,
you have a dog.
yeah, our dog now is very furry and hairy, and that the Netsuke isn't. But I think there's sometimes I'll just draw for fun, or I'll have ideas and sketch stuff, and then put them to one side, and I might not look at them again for 12, 18 months, and then I'll go
Whoa.
back through and find bits that I like, and then develop the idea further. I can't. I think it was a photo on Facebook a friend shared of a greyhound, which are very skinny dogs. They're very lean and very short fur, so you can see all the muscles, and I really like the form of them. And it's like I used to do a lot of life drawing, so from a life drawing principle, they're quite interesting dogs because you can see all the structure, you can see all the muscle structure,
Yeah.
and I also like the antique Netsuke, particularly from the Kyoto school of Netsuke. They did a lot of seated dogs. So just trying to take a traditional subject matter and do it in a more modern way, and more in my style as well. So it's not just a copy of what they were doing.
Yeah.
It's a contemporary version of that. But and then it's just again it's trying to work the idea into a compact item that will work as a Netsuke. So it can't have any bits that protrude out, or really, you couldn't have pointy ears because they would dig into someone's side
Yeah.
and get caught on clothing. So it's trying to work that idea you have into that nice compact form without it looking squashed or really bunched up. You need it to feel like it's got some movement to it, and there are lots of considerations in it. It is like trying to solve a puzzle sometimes.
Yeah, I guess it's like you need to have sort of smooth lines and the surroundings because you're supposed to carry it all the time. But you still want it to be lively, like you said. And that's why I like this dog because it's so cute. So it's definitely very successful. And as we just celebrated Halloween a couple of weeks ago, you also made one with the Halloween carved pumpkin. And there are two small animals, but I can't tell from the photo. What is that one?
So the animals, there's a bat on top of it, and there's a rat underneath, and you find a lot of antique Netsuke. They're quite common subjects within antique Netsuke, or the bat and the rat. Not normally together, separately, but also you get a
Okay.
lot of antique Netsuke of pumpkins and squash and gourds. But I've visited Japan a few times, especially in autumn, and the American sort of festival of Halloween is very evident in Japan. They've really adopted that, and everywhere has pumpkin decorations up and stuff and ready for Halloween. So it's working some of the modern symbolism from Japan into a new Netsuke, because whilst also kind of alluding to the traditional subject matter, and obviously bats and rats are kind of associated with Halloween as well. So I've tried to combine all three of those into a modern Netsuke using modern symbolism from Japan.
Yeah.
Because normally Netsuke have some sort of either symbolism or story, or combined together within them. All the antique ones kind of mean something, whether it's just a Netsuke of a rat or whether it's a pumpkin, or they normally meant something, and it
Yeah.
something about culture or mythology or symbolism. So it's trying to continue on that tradition as well.
Yeah, I think what's interesting is when I look at that, we recognize immediately the cultural references. As I say, it's for the Halloween. But from the Asian background, I know that usually red, yeah, we don't like it, but it's also a symbol of prosperity because they steal rice and, you know, food, and it means you always have food and things at home. As for the bat, it's also a sign of luckiness. So it's interesting to see how you combine that into a contemporary sign, and also reflecting, you know, in Japan, they are also celebrating Halloween. It's a global event. And I think that what really speaks to, let's say, to the people today. But interestingly, as you just explained, there's also a link to the traditional Netsuke. And I think it also tells in the form, because when I look at the traditional Netsukes, in terms of the forms and the shapes, it's probably more Japanese traditional for the characters that we don't know. While in yours, you know, for example, the dog, it looks really cute. It's more realistic, like the dog that we have next to the door, instead of a more artistic expression. And I know that the material for Netsuke is also very important in terms, you know, for your design, for the selection of the subjects. So how does it usually works? Like you get the idea, maybe you want to carve something, and then you saw the material, then it get unique, you know, united together perfectly, then you start, or you have an idea, you may look for the material for some time, or you see a piece and it turns out right, it can be something.
Well, kind of all of those, really. Sometimes I have an idea for a Netsuke, which I'll have, like I was saying before, have an idea for a long time before I actually start work. And sometimes it's spend a long time trying to find the right piece of wood for that idea. Normally I work in boxwood. The likes of the dog was made from boxwood, which you can carve very finely in and do very fine detail. The dog was only kind of about 6 centimeters tall. You know, it's very, very small. But so you need a really compact wood to get a lot of detail into that. But the pumpkin was made from plum wood, so from a plum tree, which is a much softer wood. You can work much faster in it. And I actually got, and it also takes a richer red colour. And I got the wood first, and then had the idea of the pumpkin and carved that relatively quickly. So you can work either way. And there are sometimes you get different types of material in different shapes, and the shape of the material would dictate the subject that you might carve in that. Certainly in materials like corals and stuff like that, but because of obviously the restrictions around materials and stuff like that, it is harder to work in those sort of things. And like so, I use coral maybe for inlay and that sort of thing now, but I don't use any ivories. I won't use any ivories now. The restrictions are very make it very difficult to work in materials like that, but equally, from a moral standpoint now, I can't really justify why it would be okay to work in ivory. I think it's a material that is beautiful, but it's had its time, and it's something that we should move away from now. But yes, so again, with material, there's lots of considerations go into that when you're working on something. And I'm surrounded by lumps of wood and all sorts of everywhere, boxes of just bits of offbits, and
they are really tiny. They're really tiny. I never carved any. Well, maybe I did it when I was at school really long time ago. And as an outsider, I just wonder, you know, every move that you make, are you nervous? Because if you made something wrong, they're so tiny, will it damage or, you know, damage your creation, or you can find a way to make it up? Because in oil painting, it's layers of colors, and maybe you can correct something. But when I look at the Netsukes you do, they are tiny. And I just wonder, what if you just made a mistake? Is it okay, or it's end of the world and you need to start again?
It depends on the mistake, really. Sometimes if things are getting very small and thin, bits can break that you didn't want to break, and then you often then have to adapt to the design and change it slightly. I am quite nervous about removing too much material, because once it's gone, then
it's
you
gone.
can't add it, it's gone. because I mean it's always generally, unless there's a bit of inlay, it's a solid piece of wood. You can't start gluing bits on, because then when you come to stain it and polish it, that will stand out and it won't look very good. So I am quite nervous about removing too much, but yeah, mistakes do happen. Fortunately, I don't think I've had any that I've spent hundreds of hours on and had to abandon. Sometimes you can get wood that splits as well. You'll find wood obviously is a living material, so it can expand, it can change, it can so you have to be careful as well about how you treat the wood sometimes, and looking for flaws in it before you work it. So yeah, you do have to be careful, and mistakes do happen. But say I've been lucky so far, touch wood, that I haven't had to stop anything.
Good for you. But I imagine it requires a lot of attention, concentration, and that's really fascinating. Like I imagine you thinking about that all the time, how to do, every movement, every cut that leads to the next step. And that's really fascinating about the Netsuke. For example, how much time did you spend, for example, on the little dog?
It's always hard to tell because I never keep track of the time, but it will be hundreds of hours. I mean, you spend such a long time, and it might just be a few hours here, a few hours there in front of the television and stuff like that. But from start to finish, it will be hundreds of hours that I've spent on a design.
Yeah, so it's really huge amounts of efforts, work, back into a tiny object like the Netsuke. Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah. And so and you talk about the, these art fairs for Netsukes, and you say that today in Japan, people still use that. So what are usually these collectors in UK, or it's more the Japanese market, or maybe worldwide? How do you see Netsuke as a contemporary object? It's great to see it's keep evolving, like exactly what you do.
Yeah, I think the contemporary market in Japan is probably more active. There certainly seems to be more artists and possibly collectors, but it's not a world I've really managed to make any headway into so far. Obviously, language is a barrier.
Yeah, I would imagine. But are they also open to like foreign artists? I mean, artists like you outside Japan? Do they also, the local market, they also interested? Okay.
Yeah, they are. I mean, so like the museum I mentioned before, and Princess Takamado from the imperial family, she collects contemporary Netsuke, and our late husband did as well, and they've got Western artists in their collections. Quite a few really from some of the books I own. They do categorize them as other artists, as Western artists, as also the Japanese artists do come first. I think it's tradition they're trying to keep alive within Japan, because I think in modern Japan, most people don't really know what Netsuke are any longer. But I think Netsuke seem to have a global appeal. There seems to be collectors in every continent. In the European and American market, it's predominantly antique Netsuke that people are interested in.
Yeah.
But all my contemporary pieces I've sold have been within kind of Europe and America and places like that. So there are people often like to have one or two contemporary ones in their collection as well. And it might just be that there's a particular subject matter that you work on that appeals to them. So quite often you'll find there'll be someone who only collects antiques, but then actually they will be tempted by a contemporary one because it's subject matter that they really like. So they might only own one contemporary one, and it's always a bit of an honour where somebody's broken that rule to buy one of your pieces. It's very flattering. And I do get a few commissions as well. So there are people who are particularly interested in a certain thing, they'll ask me to make it. Which is good. I'm working on a commission at the moment, which is they wanted a commission of their cat particularly, so I'm busy working on I'll see if I can get the light right on this so it's not too bright. It's a little.
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
There we go.
Wow.
So it's a sleeping cat.
Yeah. Did you get like a photo, video of the cat?
Yeah, I've had a few photos of it to work from.
Wow.
I'm working on sanding and polishing at the moment, and then it'll go through the staining process because this cat has lots of different colours on it. So it's white in some areas, it's dark in other, grey in other areas, and ginger in between, and it has stripes in some areres. So there's going to be a lot of staining. So there's still lots of work to do on that one, but so that's the only piece I'm working on at the moment. It's hard for us to work on more than one piece at once. So quite often it'll be one piece I'll work on start to finish. I am trying to overlap pieces sometimes, but it's more of a time thing. It's just having the time to work on more than one piece. It becomes quite difficult.
Wow, I see there's still quite a lot of work to complete, but once it's done, please share a photo because I really look forward to it. And I have to say, it's pity that so far I have never ever hold a Netsuke in the hand. I only see pictures. I guess that will completely make a difference when you have really a physical contact with that. That's
There's a lot in Netsuke. It's not just about how they look and stuff. It is about the feel of a Netsuke as well. So it's about how smooth it is in the hand, how it fits in the hand. It's much more than just what they look like and what the subject matter is. Because they were, like I was saying before, they were always practical objects. They were tactile objects. They were meant to be handled and used, and you couldn't have pointy bits on them and that sort of thing. So there is a lot in how a Netsuke feels as well. So it is, if you get the opportunity, or if there's an auction nearby which maybe has a collection, it is worth maybe to go and have a handle of them, just so you can see that. And they vary in size. Some of the antique ones can be absolutely tiny, and then some of them are really quite chunky and big as well. So they do vary in size and quality, and it is worth handling some if you can, or maybe just contacting an antique dealer who has some. They're always happy generally to talk to people about Netsuke, even if maybe they're not going to buy. Just if they're interested, they're always happy to share. What I would say with that is people need to be cautious if they are interested, because there's so many fakes out there. There's so many which aren't genuine Netsuke, which have...
what do you mean by fake or not genuine?
So the difficulty was when Netsuke first started showing up in European markets in the 1800s, and the Japanese realised that Netsuke were good for export, they started making them just to export. So they're called tourist Netsuke. They were made specifically for tourists, and in some sense they are genuine Netsuke because they were made in Edo period Japan and Meiji Japan. But then China started making lots, and China's still making. Yeah, so you find there's a lot of wood. I mean, if you go on eBay, there's far more forgeries than there are genuine ones, and they're generally quite low quality. So the how they look compared to a genuine antique Netsuke. So it is always worth going to a dealer and looking at some genuine one first. But there's lots of antique dealers out there who don't know much about Netsuke, who will have a lot of the Chinese ones, which unfortunately are still getting made, and many are made from ivory still. So it is a bit of a problem to be aware of. So if you can find a specialist dealer who knows what they're talking about, it's worth going to have a look. And just to learn a bit more, or buy a few books. There's some cheap books, or you can, from the British Museum and the V&A, and many of the big museums across Europe have Netsuke collections, and have done little books which are 10, 20 euros, something like that, which you can see some genuine ones and look at the quality of them, the quality of the carving. And that's a good way of learning about them to start with. And there's loads of groups on Facebook and stuff like that you can see.
Yeah, that's what I'm about to say. Also on internet, there are, I think you can find also information, a lot of different sources, and it's really amazing because they are tiny, but there are a lot of stories. Because
Yeah,
once you get into, they refer to maybe the Japanese folklore, or you can get to see when we talk about the antique Netsukes, you know, the lifestyle of the time. And that's what I
yeah,
like when they depicted these people who are doing different things, a bit like, you know, what you do with the Halloween. Like the
yeah.
21st century way of living with the traditional elements. That's so. Thank you so much for the advice. And my last question, if you would like to share with us, what is the most memorable Netsuke that you have ever seen? What was it?
Oh.
It can be your creation or something you see in Japan or elsewhere.
So, I mean, there's loads. It'll definitely be an antique one because some of the antique art, the artists were fantastic at what they did. Um, I'm very interested as a Netsuke school. So the fact that in old Japan there was different schools where basically different artists would have workshops and different pupils who learned from them. So there was a one called the Source School, who were relatively recent. I mean, the Source School was kind of from the very late 1800s up until the 1950s and maybe even a bit further on, so relatively contemporary. The Source School artists created, and especially an artist called Marita Soko, created wood carvings which were phenomenally realistic and beautiful and well thought out, and sometimes very elaborate netsukes, which were copies of Hokusai prints and stuff like that, to ones where they were just of a chestnut, but so realistic that you wouldn't be able to tell it wasn't a chestnut. So there's but so I can't pick one. There, there's another
Actually,
artist.
it's a difficult question. Yeah, considering all the things that you have said.
There was one other artist, and this one I held as Netsuke. There was an artist, I think it's pronounced Kyogasai Masasugu, who was a phenomenal carver, but mostly in ivory, and he worked in the 1800s. But there was a Netsuke of a boar he made, which was in ebony. So the phenomenally beautiful, realistic carving of this boar with inlays of coral and a little ivory snake which was biting the boar. I don't know what the symbolism of it was, but it was just perfect. I mean, the quality of his work is unbelievable. And Masasugu, so Masatsugu is yeah,
Okay.
Masasugu. I can't spell his first name, but if you Google Masasugu, there was lots of artists called Masasugu, but he comes up the most because he's kind of valued the most, and those Netsuke sell for. I think that ball was in the region of about 40,000 pounds or euros. So, you know, that's. But I mean, if you compare that to an oil painting, it's relatively cheap. I couldn't afford it, but you know, it's cheaper than a Monet or a Van Gogh or something like that. So,
Yeah, but
beautiful.
it's a different kind of art, and I think it's, you know, it's a different story. Let's say, but there's a lot of work and efforts that put into that. Especially, you know, it's interesting to hear from your perspective as a carver, well, an artist, how you work on that, and how you see the Japanese tradition, the Japanese art and culture from a Westerner perspective. So I think that's what makes also your creation and your story very interesting.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. So for our audience, you know, I'm sure that once you finish, you're going onto the internet and look for the Netsuke, and make sure that you follow Adam on Instagram. And Adam also has his own website that you can visit. if you ever, want to have that, he's open to commission. So it's absolutely fascinating. And I do hope, very soon I can get to hold a Netsuke in my hand, as what was the writer was talked about, in the book, the hair with an amber hair. So with amber eyes. So thank you so much, Adam, for your time. And thanks for everyone for listening. Good luck for your work, and keep going. I look forward to see more of your creations.
I'll have to make some more and be a bit more regular at posting. And the website definitely needs updating. I was just thinking about that earlier today. I haven't updated the website in a long time, so that'll be my job for the weekend, I think.
Yeah, that will be good. Definitely share all the things that you have created. Even if we can't hold that from the photo, it's already fascinating.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Have a lovely evening, and see you soon, everyone. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye.